Emmy Göring. In 1935, Europe held its breath as Germany rose with the force of a whirlwind, poised to shatter the continental order. Amidst an atmosphere thick with ambition and the scent of gunpowder, Berlin dawned radiant and sun-drenched. Tens of thousands of citizens cheered until they were hoarse, accompanied by the thunderous swell of a military band. Houses were draped in banners, and 30,000 soldiers formed a massive guard of honor lining the streets. Through the jubilant crowd, a couple passed in a carriage adorned with tulips and daffodils. Standing beside them was their best man, the most powerful person in the world at the time, Adolf Hitler. This was the wedding of Hermann Göring, Hitler's right-hand man, and the moment Emmy Göring became the first lady of the Third Reich. But if you look closely at those jewels and that magnificent wedding dress, you might see the grim reality. They were looted from war victims and concentration camps. In the heart of an empire built on blood and tears, Emmy sat unbothered at the pinnacle of society, wearing the jewelry of the dead while constantly insisting she knew nothing of politics. Was this the tragic innocence of an art-loving woman, or was it the performance of a lifetime by a mediocre actress? Was she a woman who simply looked the other way, or one who willingly married the angel of death in exchange for luxury and power? I have the evidence and the darkest secrets regarding these butchers and their wives within Hitler's inner circle. Hit subscribe. Let's peel back the curtain. Our story doesn't begin in the mud. It begins with the cloying, sweet scent of chocolate. Emmy Sonnemann was born in Hamburg in 1893. Her father was a wealthy food factory owner, and her mother was an actress at the German National Theater in Weimar. To put it bluntly, Emmy was old money for her time. She wanted for nothing, from intricate lace gowns to high society tea parties. But as the saying goes, a full stomach often breeds a restless mind. Emmy had no interest in being a socialite waiting for a husband. She craved the spotlight. She wanted the stage lights burning on her face. Her father initially resisted, wanting her to settle down and start a family. Her mother, however, supported her, on one condition: she had to prove herself by winning a scholarship to drama school through merit alone. After graduating, she secured a position at the National Theater in Weimar. Yet Emmy was merely a mediocre actress. She never achieved any breakout success or left a lasting mark on the craft. In 1916, she married Karl Köstlin, a fellow actor in Trieste, Austria-Hungary. From then on, she was known as Emmy Köstlin. They were brought together by the glow of the footlights, but the flame died out by 1926. In her memoirs, she claimed they realized they were better off as friends and parted ways. Emmy entered her 40s with the mindset of a has-been, no husband, no illustrious career, and the looming shadow of aging fast approaching. Then came 1932 at a small cafe in Weimar. This was the turning point in the script of her life. Emmy sat there, maintaining the elegant air of an aging starlet when he appeared. Hermann Göring was already a titan of the Nazi Party, NSDAP, and a member of the Reichstag. While Emmy didn't approach him directly, Nazi leaders, who had accompanied Adolf Hitler to the Kaiser Café, a regular haunt of hers, were looking to establish ties within the arts. At the time, Hermann was the pitiful widower. His first wife, Karen, had recently passed away, leaving behind a void of grief and fanaticism. When he looked at Emmy, he didn't see a middle-of-the-road actress. He saw a Nordic goddess, blonde, blue-eyed, and radiating grace. He needed a woman to fill the void, and Emmy needed a life raft to save her sinking life. In a humorous twist of fate, Emmy didn't even know who Hermann was at first. She actually mistook him for Joseph Goebbels, the diminutive propaganda chief. They met again shortly after, still in Weimar. Despite having seen him before without speaking, this time, Emmy couldn't take her eyes off the powerful, somber widower. She was moved by his speech about Karen, the wife he had lost to a heart attack in 1931. Hermann's devotion to his first wife was legendary, bordering on the extreme. Emmy, ever sensitive to tragedy, was completely swayed. She wasn't frightened by Karen's ghost. Instead, she was captivated by this man's strange loyalty. Before long, she confided in a friend that she was happy that after all these years, I've finally met Hermann, a man who fits my ideal. The relationship began with bizarre mementos. Hermann gave Emmy a portrait of his deceased wife, a silent confirmation of the role she was expected to fill. Passionate love letters followed, and soon he brought her into his world under the official title of private secretary. Tall, blonde, and statuesque, she represented the mythologized image of the German Nordic woman, much like his late wife. In Berlin, during the Torchlight Parade celebrating Hitler's appointment as Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, Emmy watched from the Kaiserhof Hotel, feeling the heat of power rising to meet her. After the Reichstag fire in late February, she shielded him, attempting to provide an alibi by claiming they were on the phone when the fire broke out. As Göring's power scaled, from minister without portfolio to Prime Minister of Prussia and Reich Minister of Aviation, Emmy's career followed suit. Göring intervened personally to secure her the lead role in Hans Jost's play Schlageter at the State Theatre. Since partnering with Göring, Emmy's career soared, though in a way that was utterly humiliating to the integrity of the arts. Emmy didn't care about politics. She didn't care about the brown shirts smashing Jewish storefronts in the streets. She only cared that her face was on the covers of magazines. Is the selfishness of an artist granted absolute power a truly terrifying weapon? On April 10, 1935, Berlin shook with a wedding history calls the most extravagant of the Third Reich. It wasn't Hitler's wedding, but Hermann and Emmy's. And the best man, Adolf Hitler himself. The streets were decked out, Berlin's city center was closed to traffic, and hundreds of planes from the newly formed Luftwaffe soared over the couple. Accounts of the ceremony describe it vividly. 8 orchestras performed in front of Göring's palace. The day was declared a national holiday. Houses were draped in flags, and 30,000 soldiers stood in a guard of honor as the couple passed in a carriage adorned with tulips and daffodils on their way to the chancellery. Journalist Louis Lochner of the AP wrote, "It looked as though an emperor were getting married." The wedding was a spectacle of opulence, attended by aristocrats, artists, and Nazi officials, and overflowing with priceless gifts. Emmy entered the Berlin Cathedral in a pristine white gown, her smile as radiant as if she were performing the greatest role of her life. She was now Emmy Göring, the true First Lady of Germany, as Hitler was unmarried. She stood at the summit, looking down at the crowds chanting, "Heil." She had it all: recognition, wealth, and a husband willing to lay the world at her feet. This wedding wasn't just a marriage, it was a propaganda message. It was a show of stability, civilization, and beautiful ladies. Emmy was the soft face, used to mask the gun barrels being forged at a fever pitch in the factories. If you were a washed-up actress and the devil offered you the role of queen on the condition that you close your eyes to every atrocity, would you have the courage to refuse? Or would you too smile and step into the carriage like Emmy? At Göring's request, Emmy ended her 23-year acting career. This didn't seem to bother her. She embraced her new domestic life, especially since Göring was a doting and attentive husband. Following their 1935 wedding, Emmy officially became the First Lady of the Third Reich. Since Hitler remained a bachelor, Emmy naturally ascended to become the most powerful woman in Germany. She no longer had to beg for applause on second-rate stages. Now an entire nation bowed before her. The woman who once moved and spoke according to a director's script was now hosting state banquets and rubbing shoulders with Europe's elite. Hermann Göring, a man as sentimental as he was brutal, built her a private paradise, the Herrenhal estate. Imagine a palace nestled in the forest northeast of Berlin, so vast it housed exotic animals and a staff so large they could cater to every whim. But where did this opulence come from? The walls of Herrenhal were lined with thousands of masterpieces, Cranach, Renoir, Vermeer, and dozens of others. Every single one had been confiscated by Hermann from Parisian museums or the private collections of Jewish families who had been forced onto deportation trains, many never to return. This stolen collection was so massive it would put the world's greatest museums to shame. Emmy sat there, sipping tea and entertaining guests surrounded by blood-stained art, draped in rare furs whose original owners likely froze to death in cattle cars. Emmy's true talent was rebranding indifference as a virtue. She constantly claimed, "I am just a woman of the arts. I know nothing of politics." But one has to ask, Emmy, did you not see the blood and tears behind the paintings you admired every day? Then there was her wardrobe and jewelry collection. It was so vast it's almost impossible to comprehend. Few women in Europe could rival her. At state galas, Emmy was radiant, her arms heavy with solid gold and diamonds. However, this wardrobe is haunting. It is not for the faint of heart. Every thread, every glittering accessory bore the fingerprints of victims whose families were being tortured or erased by the Nazi regime. Every item she wore was beautiful, yet it reeked of a darkness that no expensive perfume could mask. Her elegance was woven from a ledger of theft and death. Comment 1 if you think wearing the belongings of the dead or dying is normal. I find it absolutely chilling. Comment 9 if you agree with me. Even at the post-war trials, Emmy played the role of the innocent wife to an absurd degree. She insisted she only wore what her husband gave her, never asking how her closets remained full while Europe starved. Her defense sounded like a bad script, yet ironically, in the chaos of post-war justice, this faux naivety was shockingly effective, helping her escape the harshest sentences. But being the First Lady wasn't all glamour. Emmy had a permanent thorn in her side: Eva Braun, Hitler's secret mistress. This was a dramatic battle for status. Emmy, with her faux aristocratic blood and arrogance, looked down on Eva as a cheap photographer and a shadow lover unworthy of her circle. Emmy openly snubbed Eva at the Berghof. The result? Hitler was livid. Emmy had underestimated the importance of Hitler's secret companion. She thought she was untouchable, but she was wrong. While Eva wasn't public, she demanded, and received, absolute respect within the inner circle. The dictator eventually barred the Görings from his private gatherings. Emmy retreated into her glass cage at Harrenhal, starting a life of insane luxury to compensate for her political fall from grace. In 1938, at the age of 45, an age considered quite late for motherhood at the time, Emmy gave birth to their daughter, Edda. This wasn't just a family matter, it was a national event. Hermann Göring went to absurd lengths, ordering 500 fighter jets to fly over Berlin to celebrate his daughter's birth. While German citizens were beginning to tighten their belts for war, Edda lay in a golden cradle, receiving hundreds of thousands of gifts and telegrams from around the world. The Luftwaffe even provided her personal security, and Hitler himself was her godfather. In her baptism photos, we see a ring of gray uniforms, the most powerful and feared men in the empire. Hitler is seen holding the child with a mask of benevolence, while Emmy smiles beside him, marking the absolute zenith of her power. In late 1939, she officially joined the Nazi Party. There is some debate about this, as rumors suggest her membership number was backdated to 1932 to make her appear as one of the old guard loyalists. As World War II broke out, Hermann Göring spiraled into morphine addiction, obesity, and paranoia. The Luftwaffe's failure over London caused him to lose face with Hitler. Yet, at Harrenhal, Emmy's lavish parties continued. She played the devoted wife, the gentle mother, and the apolitical woman. When her old Jewish friends from the theater world mysteriously vanished, she simply shrugged. When the smell of smoke from the eastern crematoriums drifted on the wind, she simply dabbed more French perfume on her handkerchief. Emmy enjoyed the extravagant lifestyle funded by corporate contributions and her husband's looted estates across Germany, Austria, and Poland. She indulged in his eccentricities, such as keeping lion cubs as house pets. She wore diamond necklaces stripped from Holocaust victims without a second thought. Interestingly, the Görings were actually quite popular with the public, largely because they never appeared to have any overt political ambitions. Even the exiled Jewish journalist Bella Fromm once remarked, "She is not a schemer. She is a kind, motherly Valkyrie-type woman. Emmy is a charmer." By 1945, the political influence had vanished. The all-night parties at Harrenhal faded into the silence of empty halls. As Allied guns drew near, Emmy fled with her daughter to the Bavarian Alps on January 31, 1945. Before leaving, she distributed pieces of jewelry stolen from the Rothschild family to her servants, the final scraps of a crumbling empire. In April 1945, the scent of death hung over Berlin. Hermann scrambled to evacuate his looted treasures. A special train carrying 1,000 paintings and dozens of statues was snuck into a bunker near Berchtesgaden. With the Red Army closing in, Hermann ordered Carenhall to be blown up so his treasures wouldn't fall into Russian hands. After Hitler's final birthday on April 20th, Hermann made a fatal blunder. He suggested he take over leadership from Hitler. Consequently, the entire family was arrested by the SS on orders from their former best man. From the peak of power, Emmy found herself locked in a cramped bunker, waiting for death at the hands of her husband's own comrades. After Hitler's suicide, they were moved to Mauterndorf Castle. On May 7th, Göring was captured by the Americans. Emmy was arrested on October 25th that same year. Her daughter Edda was left with local farmers for a time before eventually joining her mother in Straubing prison. In the explosions at Carenhall and the fires that consumed Berlin, the luxury, the silk dresses, and the looted art all went up in smoke. Emmy Göring may not have been a direct killer, but she was the decorator of the crime. She was the one who made atrocity look elegant and smell sweet. In 1945, the world witnessed a staggering reversal of fortune. Emmy Göring, who once boasted a vast wardrobe of hundreds of magnificent gowns, was arrested by the Allies. Can you imagine it? The woman who once owned a fashion empire was reduced to just 2 tattered dresses to rotate through in a bleak prison cell. In Nuremberg, where her husband Hermann was on trial for crimes against humanity, Emmy was permitted to visit him through a glass partition. In those final moments, instead of questioning the atrocities Hermann had committed, Emmy chose to play the role of the blindly loyal wife to the bitter end. According to historical records, under strict security measures, Göring was handcuffed to a guard, and the couple was separated by a glass pane and a fine mesh. Edda recited short poems, and her parents spoke desperately of trivialities. When Göring was sentenced to death, they met for the last time on October 7, 1946. In that moment, Emmy told him, "You can die now with a clear and peaceful conscience. You did all you could at Nuremberg for your comrades and for Germany. I will always believe you died for Germany." On October 15, 1946, just hours before he was to face the gallows, Hermann committed suicide by swallowing poison. His death didn't just make Emmy the widow of one of history's most notorious war criminals. It stripped away her final shield against the public's fury. On May 29, 1947, an arrest warrant was issued for her, just as it was for the wives of all those convicted at Nuremberg. They were accused of profiting from their positions during the Nazi regime. The charges against Emmy were specific. She was labeled an active Nazi participant who built a life of luxury on the blood and bones of millions of victims. This was when her instincts as an actress truly took center stage. Emmy shed the image of the arrogant First Lady, replacing it with the persona of a frail, aging woman plagued by illness, an innocent wife who loved her husband and remained apolitical. She justified her extravagant lifestyle and wardrobe as nothing more than a way to please her husband. She adamantly claimed she knew nothing of the concentration and extermination camps, using a few Jewish acquaintances she had helped in the past as human shields for her reputation. She pleaded with ministers to bring her before the denazification board quickly, hoping for parole to avoid spending the winter in the labor camps, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. On July 20, 1948, she was indicted by the denazification court at the Garmisch-Partenkirchen labor camp. Prosecutor Julius Herf moved to classify her as a major offender. He argued that her devotion to Göring naturally led to her acceptance of Nazi ideology, a view bolstered by the immense generosity and lavish lifestyle he provided her. It was also argued that her 1933 appointment to the Berlin State Theater was purely a result of the Nazi rise to power. The trial's outcome was a farcical compromise. She was found guilty as a Category 2 offender, a profiteer of the Nazi regime. She was sentenced to 1 year in a labor camp, a sentence essentially negated by the time she'd already served. She was ordered to forfeit 30% of her assets and was banned from the stage for 5 years. It was a remarkably light sentence compared to the decade of decadence she enjoyed during the height of the regime's crimes. This sparked public outrage. Critics demanded she be reclassified as a Category 1 offender, calling for the total seizure of all assets acquired since 1933 and a much harsher penalty. After her release, Emmy and Etta fell into extreme poverty. They lived in a cramped apartment in Munich with no electricity or running water, a stark contrast to the grandeur of Carenhall. Emmy even attempted to sue to recover her old paintings and property, but every effort failed. Etta studied law before becoming a medical assistant, remaining single and devoted to her mother. In 1967, in the twilight of her life, she wrote her autobiography An der Zeit meines Mannes, published in English as My Life with Göring in 1972. In its pages, she attempted to downplay her and her husband's political roles while praising his character and glossing over the atrocities he instigated. This was Emmy's final attempt to whitewash history. In the book, she romanticized Hermann, describing him as a man who let others live and shifting the blame for all evils onto Hitler or the cruelties of war. She refused to look at the truth until her very last breath. Emmy died alone at the age of 80 in Munich. In that small apartment, investigators found numerous photos of Hermann Göring still prominently displayed. She spent the remainder of her days in the illusions of the past, forever confined in a glass cage of pride and guilt. Emmy Göring never broke character. She chose to live and die within a lie of her own making. What do you think of her sentence? I personally feel that poverty and loneliness at the end of her life weren't the most painful punishments for someone who once stood at the peak of such hollow vanity. She deserved far stricter justice from the law. Emmy Göring, a life that began with the sweet scent of chocolate in a wealthy home, passed through the dazzling glare of the spotlight, and ended in the long shadows of denial.